The Real Apprenticeship Company has a legal duty to adhere to the government's Prevent policy. Since 2015, all schools and further education colleges have been required by law to be able to recognise the signs of extremism and radicalisation and to report it to outside bodies. As training providers, this law also applies to us. We have prepared this presentation to introduce you to Prevent, and there will be a short questionnaire for you to complete at the end. We have trained our teams to be able to look out for any signs that may indicate our apprentices are being influenced by extreme ideologies that may lead them to commit acts of terrorism that put themselves and the community at large at risk. We see this obligation as an extension of our duty of care. We already have a duty of care to safeguard our apprentices from bullying, sexual, physical and financial abuse. And we have a safeguarding policy and a dedicated senior person to make sure that anything that puts you at risk is professionally dealt with. We have received Home Office accredited training in Prevent and are passing on this information because we feel that it's important for you, both in and outside work. You will already know that when your learner manager visits you, they fill in lots of reports about you. These are not just about your progress. They are using their professional judgment to decide whether you are at risk and assess any factors that may indicate that your welfare is being compromised. The kind of things your learner manager is looking for are signs that you may be struggling with issues that affect you as a person. In making these assessments, we are not judging your abilities or performances as an apprentice, but simply assessing if there are any concerns about your well-being. Some of the things that we look for are very general. So, for example, if your attendance is usually good and suddenly becomes poor, we may ask you some questions to establish if anything is concerning you about issues inside or outside work. Sometimes you find that apprentices are struggling with home life or personal circumstances. And in that instance, we have a welfare officer who can help and advise you. If you are worried about anything, please feel free and confident enough to speak to your learner manager. They will take your concerns seriously and will never judge or embarrass you. If it's going to be a while until your learner manager's next visit, please call the Real Apprenticeship Company and ask to speak to the welfare officer. As you may know, the UK terror threat level is severe at the moment and has been for several years. This means that a terrorist attack is highly likely. Our government has created a counter-terrorist plan known as Contest, and Prevent is part of the plan. It's a simple notion and aims to do two things: to stop terrorism at its roots and to prevent people supporting terrorists and becoming terrorists themselves. There are always news stories about extremism, but what is it? Here is a definition of extremism provided by the government when it passed the Counter-Terrorism and Security Act in 2015. Extremism is vocal or active opposition to fundamental British values, including democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance for those of different faiths or beliefs. Also included in the definition of extremism is any ideology or group that calls for the death of members of British armed forces in this country or overseas. Remember, there is more than one type of extremism, and Prevent is concerned with all of them. There are many organisations that promote extreme right-wing ideologies, for example, white supremacist groups, Holocaust denial groups, the IRA and the KKK, to name a few. Prevent is intended to be the first line of defence against radicalisation. Radicalisation is something that happens when someone is engaged with extreme ideas or doctrines. These doctrines or ideologies can be political, social, or religious. A person is considered to be radicalised once they start to sympathise with extreme ideas and decide to act on them. The ideas, wherever they spring from, have two things in common. They reject modern thinking and modern freedoms. So extremism has no respect for democracy, the law, and personal freedom. It rejects the notion of respect and tolerance for anyone who does not hold to their own particular doctrine. There are some people who are more vulnerable to being radicalised. Here is a diagram that shows that circumstances, personal and external, can influence some people to engage with extremist views and eventually become radicalised. This diagram was put together during a training session that we attended, which was endorsed by the Home Office. The left-hand side of the diagram shows things about a person that may make them more open to getting involved with terrorism. They may suffer from mental health problems, be financially vulnerable, have a family that has extreme views, they may have special educational needs, or they may have moved from place to place or even country to country. When looking at vulnerabilities to radicalisation, it's vitally important to understand that even if someone meets the criteria of being vulnerable, it does not mean they are necessarily going to be involved in terrorism. Take a look at the right-hand side of the diagram now, and you will see the external factors that might influence and radicalise some people. We all know how powerful social media is, and how easy it is to get sucked into. Sometimes the influence is not good, and it is a successful way for some extremist groups to influence and recruit supporters. The thing about the internet is that it can be very private, and a vulnerable person can literally spend hours alone on it and have a virtual world existence that bears little or no relation to the world they actually live in. Anti-terrorist police can quite easily spot a lot of radicalisation, but the terrorists they have real difficulty in finding are the lone wolves, or the ones that don't belong to any groups, who don't post their ideas on social media and who are self-radicalised just by interacting with the ideologies that they find online. You'll also notice from this diagram that British foreign policy and media more generally can make a person more vulnerable to being radicalised. When thinking about your friends and co-workers, it's important to remember that sometimes we can misinterpret someone's actions and motives. So, for instance, if one of your co-workers prays at work or decides to wear a headscarf, it's not a sign of being radicalised. It's simply a sign that they are being more interested in their religion. If another one of your co-workers has a skinhead haircut and wears Dr. Martin boots, it doesn't mean that he or she is sympathising with extreme right-wing ideologies. They might just have changed their style. This leads us on to the next element of recognising extremist radicalisation. Most people change if they are being radicalised, and sometimes we can identify the changes that appear. This slide shows that changes can be verbal, emotional, and physical. When someone is engaged with extremism, the way they speak often changes. They might talk about their new ideas or start to use racist, sexist, and homophobic language. Sometimes you might notice that social media posts start to reflect their new views. Extremist ideologies often inspire angry reactions and violent outbursts. But equally, a person who is being radicalised may well be quieter than usual and reluctant to talk and engage socially. What we are really looking for is any change. Sometimes the change is subtle and can only be seen retrospectively, but there will usually be something different. That could even be a change in the physical appearance, But as we said before, it's hard to tell if someone has just changed something about their appearance because of style change or a significant change in their ideas and values. So, growing a beard is not a significant thing on its own, but growing a beard and posting pro-ISIS material on Facebook is cause for concern. If a woman is anti-vivisection and against animal testing and she stops wearing makeup, that's nothing to be alarmed about. But if you hear her saying that scientists should be executed, that's a different matter entirely. So, TRAC has a legal responsibility to understand radicalisation, to spot it, and to refer vulnerable individuals. This simply means that if we have information, we must not keep it to ourselves but pass it on to outside bodies. Sometimes we will recognise radicalisation ourselves, and other times we may have to rely on information given to us by co-workers or depot managers. Wherever the information comes from, we have to check it, and we have to write a confidential report. This report is sent to our dedicated Prevent senior person, who will then pass it out to the authorities. It is then up to them to decide what to do next. It's really important to stress that reporting vulnerable people is not spying. It's simply a way of protecting the person and everyone else. So, what happens if we find an apprentice that we think might be radicalised? This leads us on to another part of the Prevent strategy, which is aimed at tackling extremism before it leads to acts of terrorism. We are required by law to refer any such apprentices to an outside body that can intervene and help them, and this body is called Channel, a panel of experts that meets to work with individuals to move them away from extremism and back into normal everyday life. There is always a police officer on a Channel panel, a member of the local authority, a representative from education, and maybe a religious leader if it's relevant. If an individual is under 18 years old, their parents will have to give consent, but attending a Channel is voluntary. If someone is referred to Channel and then refuses to attend, the authorities have to find another way of intervening. A person helped by a Channel panel is not a criminal. They just may have the potential to be a terrorist if not helped. Each person is dealt with individually and over a period of time. They may get help to get back into education, or maybe they may get housing help and advice. They may be given other activities to redirect them into a more positive place. They may be offered mentoring or given counselling or even religious help and guidance if that is relevant. A person can be helped by Channel for several months until it is decided they are out of danger. A person helped by Channel is not criminalised, and no record of it will ever appear on any database. So, in conclusion, we see Prevent as our duty to spot and report radicalisation that may lead to terrorism as another way of protecting our learners. If you think that one of your co-workers, apprentice or not, is struggling with extreme views and is in danger of being drawn into terrorist activities, please remember that any conversation you have with us will not be traceable to you and is absolutely confidential. We will never alert any individual to a possible referral to outside bodies, and we never approach them directly. We'll leave that up to the Channel. Now we are going to explore the concept of British values. The purpose of Prevent is to stop people engaging with extreme ideologies and committing acts of terrorism. The purpose of this training is to give you an understanding of how British values fits into the government's counter-terrorist strategy, as well as to give you an understanding of what British values are. It is considered that if people engage with British values, they will feel included in society and are then less likely to become involved with extremism. The PREVENT strategy has identified 4 British values. They are democracy, the rule of law, individual liberty, and mutual respect and tolerance for those with different faiths and beliefs. We will go on to define these concepts in a moment, but before we do, it's important that you realise that British values are taught in schools, and this teaching starts as young as reception. Ofsted expect to see evidence that British values are part of the curriculum and the culture in all schools and colleges. We are taking the time to teach you about British values because we are a training provider and the same rules apply to us. All members of the real apprenticeship team have a responsibility to be exemplary ambassadors of British values, and we have received this training too. Democracy is the first British value. Participating in the democratic process means that we have the right to vote and that elections should be free and fair. We are free to actively and openly support the party of our choice. Similarly, we are also free to decide not to vote. Did you know that 25% of the world's countries do not have democracy, and a further 30% only have partial democracy? It's something that we can take for granted, but it's not a right that everybody has, and many would like to have it. The second British value is the rule of law. The rule of law is a fundamental principle in the UK's constitution and rests on the idea that the law applies to all, to the rulers and to the ruled. During your apprenticeship, you will be taught about employment law and you will learn about employment rights and responsibilities. You will get an overview of the value of laws and how they affect you. The third British value is individual liberty. In the broadest sense, liberty means freedom. We have many freedoms in the UK that are protected by law. We have the freedom of association and can choose things according to our preferences. We can choose a religion, who to marry or whether to have children, etc. The final British value is mutual respect and tolerance for those of different faiths and beliefs. Tolerance is permitting others to practice their beliefs and make their own choices. Broadly speaking, it could be described as respect. In the UK, we have a tradition of promoting harmony and tolerance between different cultural groups. Leading on from British values is the important message that we have to actively respect other people, paying particular regard to the protected characteristics set out in the Equality Act of 2010. You will learn about the Equality Act as part of your apprenticeship. The protected characteristics are age, disability, gender reassignment, sex, race, religion and belief, pregnancy and maternity, marriage and civil partnership, and sexual orientation. Discriminating against these characteristics is against the law. We encourage you to be an ambassador of British values by showing respect to other people, understanding the Equality Act, and understanding that discrimination is against the law. Thank you for participating in this training. We hope that you found it informative and reassuring. Now follow the link to the short questionnaire.